Luke, this guy tackles two huge questions when dealing with orthodontic growth, and that is when to hire an associate and when to open a second location.
Yep.
Why are these the most dangerous, but the also like the most like alluring things that practices can do?
Well, it's interesting you use the word dangerous because most people would not use that word in the industry, but I think it could be very dangerous to your business, your profitability, your take home. It can be a complete ball and chain, or it can be your launch pad. And so, when is the time right? What we see is most people don't have the timing. See, when you're talking about real estate, they use the same word over and over again. It's location, location,
Mm.
location. When you're talking about an associate, it's timing, timing, timing. And most people get the timing wrong, just like people get the location wrong with real estate as an investment. So the timing is really key. And this guide, and I've not really seen this done many other places beyond this guide, tells you the exact timing where you need to be, how you need to approach it, your expectation. How are you going to have a training plan for this associate? Most people have a loose idea, but they may not have the right expectation with getting this person up to speed and producing the amount that's needed to not only cover their cost, but make the addition something that's very profitable and meaningful for the practice long term.
When you hire someone, whatever you're paying them, you want to get more out of them than what they're getting paid.
Well, there's kind of a benchmark for adding a second doctor. And so this guide goes over that and what your expectation needs to be short term, midterm, and long term.
Mm. So I know you say that not all motivations to hire an associate are good.
Right.
Can you break that down on why most common reasons are actually bad?
Most reasons are actually make sense. You know, I need help. I'm stressed out. I'm potentially overworked. The team is asking me too many questions. We need to be able to grow, and I can only do so much. I'm already seeing 80 to 90 patients a day. But, again, too many people think about it too soon. So if we go back to timing, how many patients are you seeing a day? Are you only seeing 50 a day? But you need to hire an associate because for what reason? Well, I have two locations. Well, okay, but what's your total production and then total collection? And that would be, pretty much revenue. What's your revenue each year? What are you collecting? What's going in the bank account? If it's only 2 million, then adding in another doctor and then paying that doctor somewhere between 250 to 350 depending on location and total compensation. Well, how's a $2 million practice do that?
Mm.
You can't unless you don't want to make any money. And so again, the intentions could be good things, but it's not the right time. You need to be at least around $3 million in collections to bring on an associate. But there's nuances, and that's why we created the guide.
So let's talk about some financial benchmarks since you brought that up. You mentioned ROI in the guide, and in the first year, it's often zero or even sometimes in the negative.
Right.
What should orthodontists be tracking monthly to make sure that their investment doesn't bleed them dry?
That's a good question. It's actually pretty simple. I mean, if you're looking at payroll, if you're looking at gross revenue, if you're looking at net revenue, so, what's your net profitability after all expenses? I mean, you can get a good gauge on things just from that. A healthy orthodontic practice, depending on the model, depending on the location, should be anywhere from the low end of 30% net profit to the high end. I've even seen it like 60%. Now, that's very, very rare. But let's just say you should at least be around 40 to 45% as a healthy practice. So if you're not there, the question is why, and looking at your expenses. And certainly if you bring on an associate too soon, that line item is going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Talking about having that line item on there, there's a lot of different ways to pay an associate. There's salary, there's bonuses, and then per diem.
Yeah.
Which way do you feel is the best way for an orthodontist to approach this?
Well, it depends on your intention and your expectation. If you're paying someone per diem, and you can bonus both. You can bonus a per diem. You could bonus a salary if you wanted to. So based on production, if they're able to chase and hit that goal, they could have some upside in that. But per diem, there's really no loyalty
Mm.
there. It's easy, and we've seen this with partners where they take a per diem gig and then they're out whenever they decide to be out. Maybe they own their own practice too, 30 miles across town, and it got busy enough. So I don't like that model long term. And the issue with introducing that to get started is it's harder to change things.
Mm.
If you set it up the right way from the beginning, it's just easier. And so if your goal is to keep an associate long term, which it probably should be, right? Unless there's some type of strategy for like a short term associate. But 99% of the time, you're going to be wanting to keep that person and have them grow with you. Figuring out a salary and bonus, with some upside there. Maybe it's not just bonusing. Maybe it's not just on production, but maybe there is an equity play. Maybe it's a small equity play, so they could get like 5%, and that could be vested over 5 years. So if they don't hit the 5-year mark, you could claw that back. You know what I mean? So there's ways to structure it, but I tend to like the salary plus performance plus maybe some type of vested equity that's small because it keeps them there. So if it keeps them there for 20 to 30 years and then they're, let's say, 10 years younger than you are, then they could be the one to transition the practice to as you leave. And then you don't have to go find a buyer. They're kind of a shoe in, and maybe even you sell them more equity along the way.
I love that because it helps them become a part of the practice. It's not just a job. It's
Yeah.
something long term.
Now, there are other ways to do it. So if that's not your goal and you want to structure it and you want to sell to a DSO in 5 to 10 years, you can do that and they can still have some upside. Certainly, if they help you hit that number that you need to hit to have the multiple that you need to have to exit, then you could also have an additional spiff around that as well.
Talking about integrating an associate within the practice, he said there's about a 12-month timeline to get them fully productive. What are a couple early phases that mistakes can happen and stall the progress?
The biggest thing I've seen is you actually handhold the associate too long because they're never going to be you. They're never going to do things exactly like you. So you can mentor them and lead them, but at some point you have to let them fly, right? And then they either can or they can't. But I've seen people talk to me 2 years in, and yeah, I'm still having to sit with the associate or they're having to shadow me. And it's like, this isn't working. There needs to be a realistic expectation of them getting up and running. And especially if you're multi-location, now they can go to those other locations where, you're there 1 or 2 days a week now, and you could build those locations up with that associate.
So it really comes down to when you're hiring an associate, you need to make sure that you have plans in place on how to mentor and get them up to pace in that
Yeah.
12 months and then let them fly.
Yeah, and it needs to be more rigorous up front. So it needs to be pretty demanding and intense up front. So they're really on their game. And as they earn trust, then you kind of start to wean them off of you, and they're allowed to, and the expectation is for them to go run their clinic.
Let's move to the location part of this guide. Opening a second location tends to sound pretty sexy. It's like, "Ooh, yeah, I got 12
Yeah.
locations or whatever." But your guide gives a big red flag when
Mhm.
opening this. So, talk about not expanding before your first practice is busy.
I always ask people this: if you were to rate your practice right now in like a letter grade, so A, B, C, D, E, F, what would it be? If somebody says, "Oh, a C plus," or, we're kind of a B minus, anything really outside of an A, why would you want to duplicate that?
Mm,
Why would you want to duplicate a B minus or a C plus? I
yeah.
think we all want to make A's, right?
Mhm.
And so if your practice isn't more or less at capacity, isn't more or less producing what it should be as a single location, you're not kind of bursting at the seams, then you may not need to go open a second location. Most practices that we look at who are thinking about adding a second location are only at about 50%
Mhm.
capacity. So, why do I need to go buy a second location? Well, somebody's going to say, "Well, Luke, that's the reason I can only get to 50% capacity in this location. So, to get more new patients, I need to go open another one." Okay, where in the US is that true? There's some outliers for sure. Like if you're in, farm town, or you're around the Amish people or something like
Yeah.
that. Well, yeah, you're limited. I've only seen maybe 5 practices like that over the past 11 years that are truly that limited.
Mhm.
And they're out there. They just don't really exist often. Even somewhere like where we're at, Pensacola, Florida. I mean, look at how many neighborhoods, communities, schools are around us, but it's not like we're in New York City,
Yeah.
not even close.
Mhm.
That being said, 4, 5, 6 practices could easily exist here and do 2, 3, 4, 5 million each in kind of the outskirts of Pensacola, Florida. And Pensacola itself is even pretty small. And so when you start to do the math, I would ask everyone this question who's watching or listening: how many new patients do you need every single month to be at capacity? And even when you're at capacity, could we look at scheduling? Could we look at the team, and could we find efficiencies? Could we look at your consult, and your new patient consult's an hour long? Their teams coming out saying, "Where's the doctor?" and they can't track you down, or maybe it's vice versa. There's just inefficiencies. And so when people are at capacity, even then you can find opportunities, but also think about it like this: are you ready to market a second location? So do you have double the marketing budget? Well, it's a new location and we can only be there 1 day a month. Okay. Nobody knows that it exists. So we need to be more aggressive with marketing in the beginning. Then once it's up and running, yeah, we can kind of come off of that and allocate the proper budget. But have you thought about that? Have you planned for that? Do you need to hire more team members to go serve that location? So who's going to work the front desk? Who's going to answer the phone? If you're only there a couple days a month, it still needs to be staffed with a scheduler, or you need to move to some type of centralized call center, patient care center. And so let's look at all the expenses. It's not just buying a building and having supplies, it's team, it's marketing. And when it's sitting there, how much is it costing you? Right. So now are you going to rent it to maybe a pediatric dentist or someone else when you're not there? Or are you going to be okay with it sitting, and can you actually stomach that? So there's a lot that goes into it. Again, I find that most people haven't fully thought this through. It's kind of like a half baked idea. It sounds good because it allows me a new location, a new demographic, a new patient pool. But what if we could kind of expand where you're already located and market more effectively and get that practice producing? Do you even need to go open a second location? Because the reality is, I've seen people do this in a lot of places. They can produce 6 to 10 million in one location. Now, most people don't even want to do 6 to 10 million. So I would argue that almost any goal could be done in a single location if it's done right.
With the right systems, the right team,
Correct.
and efficiencies. So, speaking of demographic, what is one thing that doctors often miss when evaluating a new location, and how can they course correct?
This could be the location. So when choosing real estate, that is, I was just talking to somebody actually before this, and they were talking about possibly having to move to a location that was closest to the kind of the Mecca orthodontist in the area.
Mm,
And when I asked more, that's actually why that orthodontist is selling that location, because he wants to get away from these people.
mm,
So I'm like, hey, like, I wouldn't go by that practice. Let's work with the location you have and see if we can expand whatever needs to be expanded or renovated, whatever. So I think location is big. We have a partner in Mobile who looks for the newest Publix,
hmm
and that's how he finds his next location. It's actually very smart. Look for brands with bigger budgets who know how to do better demographic studies than you do, and just follow what they do. You can go buy these tools and look at demographics yourself. They're relatively inexpensive, but I would also look at what's trending in certain areas: Publix, Starbucks, Ace Hardware, Tractor Supply. Now, depending on where you are in the country, those brands may be different. I think Starbucks is national, but I
Yeah.
don't know about Tractor Supply. But down here, that's what I would be looking at.
Yeah, indicators within the community that it is growing and
Growing.
not shrinking. So, we've just barely hit the top of the
Yeah.
iceberg. What is one last thing that you would throw in here for everybody before they jump into the guide?
Well, there's just so much more information the guide has to offer. I mean, we go through operations, what you need to have documented, team sentiment. That's a big one.
Mm,
That's probably most overlooked. When does the doctor and owner place themselves in the team shoes? What's going through their head when you talk about adding more locations and adding more doctors? Does it take pressure off of them, or does it put more pressure, more stress, more anxiety on them? And then you start to deal with more team attrition. And so we got to vaccinate against that. So this guide goes through everything. Check it out. If you're thinking about adding an associate, a location, not even now, but in the future, this guide's for you.